What if the family you trusted most became your worst nightmare? Thomas Miller, a retired engineer, gave his son-in-law everything: money, support, even his trust. But instead of gratitude, Robert invaded his new home with strangers. This is the shocking story of how Thomas fought back and reclaimed his life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments. Thomas Miller had spent more than 40 years building bridges, highways, and skyscrapers. His career as a civil engineer had been demanding but fulfilling. While his colleagues often retired with little to show besides a pension, Thomas had been careful. He saved, invested wisely, and always imagined one dream: a quiet villa by the ocean where he could spend his final years in peace. The day he signed the deed felt like victory. The villa stood on a stretch of coastline where the Atlantic waves kissed the shore with rhythmic persistence. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a horizon that seemed endless. Inside, the house was elegant but warm. Oak floors, marble countertops, and a library Thomas had dreamed of since his college days. For the first time in decades, he felt free. No deadlines, no site inspections, no impossible clients demanding overnight miracles. Just the ocean, his books, his memories, and the hope of a serene future. But peace, Thomas would soon discover, was fragile. On his second evening in the villa, while he was unwrapping a box of crystal glasses, his phone rang. He expected maybe a congratulatory call from an old colleague or one of his childhood friends who still lived in Boston. Instead, it was Robert. Robert, his son-in-law, the man Thomas had tolerated for years because of his daughter, Emily. Emily had passed away 3 years ago after a battle with cancer, but Robert still hovered around Thomas like a hawk circling its prey. "Thomas," Robert's voice boomed without a greeting, "we're on our way to your new place, 11 of us. Get the beds ready, towels, food, everything. We'll stay 2 weeks. We'll be there in about 40 minutes. Thomas froze, the glass in his hand catching the orange glow of sunset. "Robert, wait! I've just moved in. The house isn't ready for—" "Don't care," Robert cut him off. "You've got money. That means you've got space. End of discussion." The line went dead. Thomas stood alone in his kitchen, heart pounding. He had waited his entire life for this villa, this sanctuary. And now his peace was about to be invaded by 11 uninvited guests, led by the most entitled man he had ever known. Thomas sank into his leather chair, staring out at the ocean. Robert's arrogance wasn't new. Over the years, Thomas had poured staggering sums into helping Robert, helping him start businesses that failed within months, paying off debts, covering emergencies that never seemed to end. He remembered writing a check for $25,000 to save Robert's first startup. 6 months later, it collapsed. Another $60,000 went toward a mortgage down payment because Robert's credit score was a disaster. Then came Emily's medical bills, nearly $90,000. Those Thomas paid gladly, for his daughter's life was worth any fortune. But even then, Robert had found a way to complain about how the stress was affecting his own career. By the time Emily died, Thomas had given Robert almost $250,000 over the years. Yet gratitude was never part of Robert's vocabulary. Entitlement was. And now, entitlement was speeding toward Thomas's villa in the form of 4 SUVs loaded with people, luggage, and arrogance. 35 minutes later, headlights cut through the coastal dusk. Engines roared up the driveway. Car doors slammed like gunfire. Thomas stood at his front door, watching strangers pour into his sanctuary. Robert emerged first, sunglasses still on though night was falling. His wife, Jessica, a woman Thomas barely tolerated, was already live-streaming on her phone. "Oh my God, look at this place!" she squealed to her followers. "It's like a resort." They didn't knock. They didn't wait. They pushed past Thomas as if he were a doorman instead of the homeowner. Bags, coolers, beer cases, all dumped onto the marble floor. Children he hadn't even been warned about ran straight to the pool, leaving wet footprints across imported limestone. Robert clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "Come on, old man, don't be selfish. Jessica wants the master bedroom for her yoga videos. Lighting in there is perfect." "That's my room," Thomas said, his voice firmer than he expected. Robert laughed dismissively. "We drove 4 hours. Don't make this difficult." And just like that, Thomas's dream villa became a chaotic vacation. Thomas stood firmly in the hallway as Robert and Jessica began distributing rooms like landlords of a cheap motel. Strangers, people Thomas had never seen before, dragged their luggage through the corridor, arguing about who would get which guest room. "Robert," Thomas said, voice strained but steady, "the master bedroom is mine. That is not up for debate." Robert smirked, placing his heavy hand on Thomas's shoulder in a patronizing gesture. "Come on, old man. Jessica already planned her morning yoga sessions here. Don't be difficult. This house is big enough for everyone." "It's my house," Thomas shot back, stepping in front of the door. Jessica tilted her head with practiced innocence. "Thomas, honey, you're acting hostile. We're family. Family shares." The word family pierced Thomas like a rusty nail. He thought of Emily, his daughter, his anchor. Would she have wanted him to cave once more to Robert's endless entitlement? Or would she have told him to finally take a stand? The strangers behind Robert fell silent, waiting to see if the old man would surrender. Thomas's pulse hammered in his ears. Years of patience, years of financial sacrifices, all for a man who treated him not as a father-in-law, but a bottomless wallet. Not tonight. Not anymore. Thomas retreated to his study to gather his thoughts. As the noise of laughter and music filled the villa, he shut the door and pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. The ocean outside was calm, but his mind churned with storms. He remembered Robert's first plea for money. "It's just a small loan, Thomas. I'll pay you back once my landscaping business takes off." That so-called business collapsed in less than a year. Thomas never saw a cent returned. Then came the MBA tuition, $45,000. "It's an investment in the family's future," Robert had promised. The degree was completed, but Robert never held a steady job for more than a few months. Thomas also remembered the day of Emily's funeral. While he stood at his daughter's graveside, Robert had leaned close and whispered, "At least now we won't be buried under all those medical bills." The memory made Thomas grip the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. The worst part wasn't the money, it was the erosion of respect. Robert didn't see Thomas as a man anymore, only as a resource. And now Robert was in his house, with 11 people in tow, trying to seize his sanctuary. By the second hour of chaos, Thomas's villa no longer felt like home. Jessica was live streaming in the kitchen, gushing to her followers about the family vacation. Kids Thomas had never met splashed in his pool. Robert and his college buddy Mike were opening beers in the living room, leaving stains on Thomas's oak coffee table. "Unbelievable," Thomas muttered under his breath. Finally, he snapped. Standing at the center of the room, he raised his voice louder than the music. "Everyone, listen to me. This is my house. You were not invited. I want you all to leave, now." The laughter died instantly. All eyes turned to him. Robert's face hardened. "Careful, Thomas. Think about what you're saying." "I've thought about it," Thomas said, surprising even himself with the strength in his voice. "You're trespassing. Get out." Jessica's lip quivered, tears forming like a well-rehearsed performance. "You'd really throw out your own family after everything we've been through?" The word family again weaponized, distorted. Robert stepped forward, lowering his voice to a threat. "Some decisions, Thomas, you can't undo. You push us away now, and you'll regret it."
Thomas felt his heart pound, but instead of backing down, he walked to his study, locked the door, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice steadied Thomas. This is Thomas Miller. I'm the homeowner at 64 Ocean View Drive. There are about 11 people in my house who refused to leave when I asked. I need assistance. Are you in immediate danger, sir? Not yet, but they're aggressive. They've taken over my rooms. Stay where you are, sir. Officers will be dispatched within 11 minutes. Can you remain in a secure location? Yes, Thomas replied, gripping the phone. Outside the study, he heard Robert's voice through the door. Come on, Thomas, don't make this a scene. We're family. Open the door. Let's talk. But Thomas remained silent. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt when dealing with Robert: control. 11 minutes later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. Thomas exhaled, relief flooding his chest. Help was on the way. The pounding on Thomas's study door stopped the moment the sirens echoed down the private road. Suddenly, the house that had been buzzing with music and laughter, tense and quiet. Whispers filled the hallway. Jessica's voice carried through, strained but still performative. Oh my God, Robert, what if he really called the cops? He's bluffing, Robert hissed. He's too spineless. He'll cave. But Robert was wrong. 2 police officers, one tall with gray at his temples, the other younger and sharp-eyed, stepped into the foyer with authority. Good evening, the older officer said firmly. Who's the homeowner here? Thomas unlocked his study door and stepped out, deed in hand. His voice didn't tremble. I am Thomas Miller. This is my house. Robert jumped in, smiling like a politician caught in scandal. Officers, this is just a misunderstanding. We're family. Thomas is overwhelmed. He's not thinking straight. But the younger officer scanned the scene. Beer bottles, luggage, kids dripping water across marble floors. Sir, she said to Thomas, do you want these individuals removed from your property? Yes, Thomas said without hesitation, every last one of them. The word dropped like a hammer. For the first time, Robert looked uncertain. All right, everyone, the officer announced, you have 11 minutes to gather your belongings and leave. Failure to do so will result in arrest for trespassing. Chaos erupted. Jessica started crying into her phone, filming herself as if the world were ending. Mike cursed under his breath, grabbing his beer cooler. Strangers Thomas didn't even know scrambled to collect their bags. This is ridiculous, Robert barked. We drove 4 hours. You can't just throw us out. The officer didn't flinch. Sir, you made arrangements without consulting the homeowner. That's not a legal reservation. Now, move along. Thomas watched in silence as one by one the invaders retreated. Some shot him dirty looks, others muttered apologies. But it didn't matter. His house was being reclaimed, piece by piece. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, the villa was silent again. The only sound was the steady crash of waves outside. The officer handed Thomas a case number. If they return without permission, call us immediately. You've established clear grounds for trespassing. Thomas nodded, relief mingling with exhaustion. The villa finally belonged to him again. But peace didn't last long. The next morning, Thomas woke to his phone buzzing with dozens of notifications, emails, Facebook alerts, messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Robert had struck first. On Facebook, Robert had posted a long, emotional story. My father-in-law kicked us out of his house last night. He even called the police on us, his own family. Emily would be heartbroken to see her father like this. We just wanted to spend time together, but apparently money changes people. The post had hundreds of likes and shares. Friends of Emily, old neighbors, even distant relatives, all commenting with outrage. So sad. Can't believe he'd treat family this way. Prayers for you and Jessica. Jessica uploaded a video from their car, mascara running as she cried. "We just wanted a family vacation. Instead, we were treated like criminals. My kids don't understand why Grandpa doesn't love them anymore." Kids? Thomas thought bitterly. There hadn't been any kids last night. But the lie was already spreading like wildfire. Thomas sat at his desk, head in his hands. 40 years of integrity, generosity, and sacrifice, all being torn apart by a Facebook post. But he wasn't helpless. He opened his filing cabinet and pulled out a folder he had kept for years. Inside were copies of checks, bank transfers, receipts, every payment he had made to Robert. MBA tuition, mortgage down payments, car repairs, emergency medical bills. Nearly $250,000 documented in neat chronological order. Robert wanted to play emotional games. Thomas would answer with facts. He called his attorney Howard Brennan, a meticulous man Thomas trusted since Emily's passing. Howard listened patiently, then said, "Thomas, you have an exceptionally strong case. This isn't generosity anymore, it's exploitation. If Robert wants a war, we'll fight with evidence. Meet me tomorrow morning with every document you've got." For the first time since the nightmare began, Thomas felt the steady confidence of an engineer returning. Robert had underestimated him. This battle wouldn't be fought with tears on social media. It would be fought in court with facts, numbers, and the truth. Sunday morning, Thomas drove into the city with his briefcase full of documents. His hands didn't shake as they used to when dealing with Robert. Instead, they felt steady, purposeful. Years of engineering had taught him one thing: every complex problem had a systematic solution. Howard Brennan, his attorney, laid the papers across a long mahogany table. He whistled softly. "Thomas, most people never document family help. But you," he tapped a stack of bank transfers, "you've built a fortress." Together, they organized 6 years of records. $45,000 for Robert's MBA tuition, $30,000 for a wedding, $60,000 for a down payment, $115,000, Emily's treatments plus smaller emergencies, car, debts, failed business. Howard leaned back. "That's almost $300,000. This isn't kindness anymore, it's financial abuse. We'll file for unjust enrichment and elder financial exploitation. And, Thomas, his defamatory posts, those strengthen your case." For the first time in years, Thomas felt the weight lifting from his chest. Robert had always counted on manipulation, but now Thomas had something stronger: proof. Back at the villa, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with his laptop. He opened Facebook. Robert's tear-stained narrative was still trending, sympathy pouring in like waves. Thomas began typing carefully, methodically. "I've seen posts about our family situation. Here are the facts. Over the last 6 years, I've provided nearly $250,000 in financial support to Robert and Jessica, documented transfers for tuition, mortgage, medical bills, and more. I asked them to leave my home after they arrived uninvited with 11 people and refused. I'm pursuing this matter legally." He attached screenshots of bank records, check images, and receipts. No insults, no emotion, just numbers. The post went live. At first, silence. Then comments trickled in. "Wait, $250,000? Why didn't Robert mention that? This changes everything." Within hours, Robert's carefully crafted sob story was crumbling. Old friends apologized for judging too quickly. Emily's college roommate, who had been furious at Thomas the day before, wrote, "I had no idea. Robert never told us about the support. I'm sorry, Thomas." For the first time, the tide was turning. By Monday morning, Thomas's case filing was official. Robert received court papers before breakfast. The phone rang endlessly.
First Robert, then Jessica. Each call went unanswered, until finally Thomas picked up. "You sued me?" Robert's voice cracked with disbelief. "Thomas, this is family business. You don't drag family to court." "You ended family business," Thomas said calmly, "when you invaded my home with strangers." "You'll regret this," Robert spat. "Emily would be ashamed." Thomas's voice sharpened. "Don't you dare use my daughter's name to justify your greed again." For a moment, silence. Then the line went dead. Minutes later, Jessica tried. Her voice trembled with genuine fear instead of her usual dramatics. "Thomas, please, if the court forces us to pay, we'll lose everything. Think of the children." "The children you invented for Facebook sympathy," Thomas replied coldly. "This ends in court." Jessica broke into sobs before hanging up. For the first time, Thomas felt he wasn't the one begging. He was the one in control. Friday morning, Thomas walked into the courthouse with Howard by his side. Across the hall sat Robert, slumped, pale, his arrogance gone. Judge Martinez scanned the thick file of evidence. "Mr. Miller," she said to Robert, "this documentation is exhaustive. Transfers, receipts, promises to repay, even contradictory social media posts. Do you dispute any of these records?" Robert's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, these were family gifts." The judge held up a screenshot of Robert's old messages promising repayment. "Your client's own words describe them as loans. And his online statements accusing Mr. Miller of abandonment without mentioning $300,000 of support constitute defamation." Robert's shoulders slumped further. The battle was over before it had begun. Howard leaned toward Thomas and whispered, "He's finished." For the first time in years, Thomas believed it. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers. Judge Martinez folded her hands. "Mr. Robert Miller, your attorney has indicated you wish to avoid trial." Robert swallowed hard. His usual swagger had melted into sweat. "Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to discuss settlement." Howard presented their terms without hesitation. 150,000 restitution over 3 years. A public retraction of Robert's defamatory posts. A permanent no-contact order unless invited. The judge turned to Thomas. "Mr. Miller, are these terms acceptable?" Thomas studied Robert's face. He remembered Emily's dying wish. "Dad, be kind to him. He's hurting too." For years, Thomas had confused kindness with blind tolerance. Now he drew a breath and said, "Yes, I accept." Justice, Thomas realized, didn't require destroying Robert. It required boundaries. 2 days later, Robert's Facebook page carried a post unlike any he had ever made. "I wish to clarify my previous statements regarding my father-in-law, Thomas Miller. My earlier posts were incomplete and misleading. Mr. Miller has provided extensive financial support to me and my family over the years. I regret misrepresenting the situation and retract my prior comments." The comments poured in, this time not with sympathy, but with suspicion. "So you lied? Unbelievable. Thomas deserves better." Jessica's social media went quiet. The live streams, the crying videos, they disappeared overnight. For the first time in years, Robert and Jessica's voices no longer dominated Thomas's world. A week after the settlement, Thomas received a call from his nephew David, Emily's cousin. "Uncle Thomas, I saw what happened. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. Robert always seemed slippery. I wondered how he lived so well without working. Now I understand." Thomas chuckled softly. "Thank you, David. You're welcome here anytime, on invitation, not invasion." David laughed. "Fair enough. How about next weekend? I'd love to see your villa." For the first time, Thomas looked at his calendar and felt joy at penciling in a guest. Consent?
Respect, simple courtesy, it meant more than money ever could. That evening, Thomas sat on his deck with a glass of red wine. The Atlantic shimmered under a golden sunset. Inside, the villa was quiet, his sanctuary restored. He lifted Emily's framed photo from the table. "I finally did it, sweetheart. I stopped being their victim. I stayed generous, but I learned where generosity ends and exploitation begins." The ocean answered with waves, steady and cleansing. Robert would pay his restitution. Whether he learned from it or not was no longer Thomas's responsibility. What mattered was that Thomas had reclaimed his peace, his dignity, and his freedom. For the first time in years, he wasn't bracing for the next phone call, the next emergency, the next manipulation. His villa was no longer just a house. It was his fortress, earned, defended, and finally his own. The days following the court settlement were unlike anything Thomas had experienced in years. His phone, once a constant source of manipulation and guilt, was quiet. No desperate messages, no fake emergencies, no emotional blackmail. For the first time, Thomas woke up without anxiety. He brewed his coffee, walked barefoot to the deck, and let the sea breeze fill his lungs. The air felt different, lighter, freer. The villa itself began to heal too. The sand stains were gone, the furniture back in its proper place, the guest rooms aired out. He had hired a local cleaning service to erase every trace of Robert's invasion. Standing in the silent living room, Thomas realized something profound. Peace was not just the absence of noise. Peace was the absence of entitlement. News traveled quickly in their community. Robert's reputation, once polished through charm and Jessica's curated social media presence, began to crumble. Friends who once praised him now avoided his calls. His business acquaintances quietly distanced themselves. Even his in-laws whispered about how he had taken advantage of Thomas for years. One evening, Thomas received a message from a former colleague of Robert's. "He always bragged about your money, Thomas. Said you'd never cut him off. Guess he was wrong." Thomas read the words twice, a mix of bitterness and satisfaction washing over him. Robert had mistaken kindness for weakness, and now his illusion was gone. The following weekend, David arrived. He brought a bottle of wine and a smile that reminded Thomas's warmth. "Uncle, this place is incredible," David said, walking through the villa with genuine admiration. Unlike Robert, his appreciation wasn't laced with entitlement. They spent the evening on the deck, sharing stories, some joyful, some painful. David spoke of his own struggles starting a business, but unlike Robert, he wasn't asking for money. He only wanted advice. Thomas felt something stir inside him. For years, he had been drained by false family loyalty. Now, sitting with David, he realized what real family looked like: respect, honesty, and mutual care. When David left, Thomas promised himself he would nurture relationships like this, ones that gave back instead of endlessly taking. That night, Thomas returned to his study. The walls were lined with awards, certificates, and framed photos from his career. Bridges, highways, buildings that had changed skylines. He thought about how every structure he had ever built depended on one thing: a strong foundation. Without it, even the tallest tower would collapse. "Maybe life is the same," he whispered to Emily's photo. "I gave Robert everything without requiring a foundation of respect. That's why it all crumbled." He picked up his pen and wrote in his journal, "Generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. From now on, my kindness will have structure." Closing the journal, Thomas felt lighter. He had spent a lifetime building for others. Now, he was finally building a life for himself. Weeks passed, and Robert's downfall grew clearer. His once carefully maintained image as a charming widower and devoted stepchild crumbled under the weight of truth. People whispered in grocery stores. Colleagues avoided his handshake. Even his in-laws whispered about how he had taken advantage of Thomas for years. One evening, Thomas received a message from a former colleague of Robert's. "He always bragged about your money, Thomas. Said you'd never cut him off. Guess he was wrong." Thomas read the words twice, a mix of bitterness and satisfaction washing over him. Robert had mistaken kindness for weakness, and now his illusion was gone. The following weekend, David arrived. He brought a bottle of wine and a smile that reminded Thomas of Emily's warmth. "Uncle, this place is incredible," David said, walking through the villa with genuine admiration. Unlike Robert, his appreciation wasn't laced with entitlement. They spent the evening on the deck, sharing stories, some joyful, some painful. David spoke of his own struggles starting a business, but unlike Robert, he wasn't asking for money. He only wanted advice. Thomas felt something stir inside him. For years, he had been drained by false family loyalty. Now, sitting with David, he realized what real family looked like: respect, honesty, and mutual care. When David left, Thomas promised himself he would nurture relationships like this, ones that gave back instead of endlessly taking. That night, Thomas returned to his study. The walls were lined with awards, certificates, and framed photos from his career. Bridges, highways, buildings that had changed skylines. He thought about how every structure he had ever built depended on one thing: a strong foundation. Without it, even the tallest tower would collapse. "Maybe life is the same," he whispered to Emily's photo. "I gave Robert everything without requiring a foundation of respect. That's why it all crumbled." He picked up his pen and wrote in his journal, "Generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. From now on, my kindness will have structure." Closing the journal, Thomas felt lighter. He had spent a lifetime building for others. Now he was finally building a life for himself. Weeks passed, and Robert's downfall grew clearer. His once carefully maintained image as a charming widower and devoted stepchild crumbled under the weight of truth. People whispered in grocery stores. Colleagues avoided his handshake. And even Jessica's friends stopped engaging with her endless online drama. One evening, Thomas received a message from a former colleague of Robert's. "He always bragged about your money, Thomas. Said you'd never cut him off. Guess he was wrong." Thomas read the words twice, a mix of bitterness and satisfaction washing over him. Robert had mistaken kindness for weakness, and now his illusion was gone. The following weekend, David arrived. He brought a bottle of wine and a smile that reminded Thomas of Emily's warmth. "Uncle, this place is incredible," David said, walking through the villa with genuine admiration. Unlike Robert, his appreciation wasn't laced with entitlement. They spent the evening on the deck, sharing stories, some joyful, some painful. David spoke of his own struggles starting a business, but unlike Robert, he wasn't asking for money. He only wanted advice. Thomas felt something stir inside him. For years, he had been drained by false family loyalty. Now, sitting with David, he realized what real family looked like: respect, honesty, and mutual care. When David left, Thomas promised himself he would nurture relationships like this, ones that gave back instead of endlessly taking. That night, Thomas returned to his study. The walls were lined with awards, certificates, and framed photos from his career: bridges, highways, buildings that had changed skylines. He thought about how every structure he had ever built depended on one thing: a strong foundation. Without it, even the tallest tower would collapse. "Maybe life is the same," he whispered to Emily's photo. "I gave Robert everything without requiring a foundation of respect. That's why it all crumbled." He picked up his pen and wrote in his journal, "Generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. From now on, my kindness will have structure." Closing the journal, Thomas felt lighter. He had spent a lifetime building for others. Now he was finally building a life for himself. Weeks passed, and Robert's downfall grew clearer. His once carefully maintained image as a charming widower and devoted stepfather crumbled under the weight of truth. People whispered in grocery stores, colleagues avoided his handshake, and even Jessica's friends stopped engaging with her endless online drama. One evening, Thomas scrolled through Facebook only to see Robert's retraction shared again and again, each time with biting commentary. So all along, Thomas was supporting him? $300,000, that's not family loyalty, that's exploitation. Thomas didn't comment. He didn't need to. The truth was finally speaking for itself. A month later, an envelope arrived at Thomas's villa. The handwriting was shaky, Jessica's. Inside was a short letter. Thomas, I know you don't believe me, but I never wanted things to go this far. Robert always convinced me it was fine to ask for more, that you'd never say no. I went along with it. Maybe I was selfish too. I'm sorry for how I treated your home. Please don't hate me. Thomas folded the letter carefully. He didn't feel hate, only a deep weariness. For years, he had been drained by their choices. Forgiveness, he realized, didn't mean reopening the door. It meant letting go of the weight. He placed the letter in his desk drawer beside Emily's photo. Spring arrived, and with it came change. David began visiting more often, sometimes with his fiancée, sometimes alone. Together they cooked, laughed, and planned. Unlike Robert's chaotic invasions, David's visits were grounded in respect. One evening, David said, "Uncle, I think Emily would be proud of you. You stood up for yourself. You finally built something for you, not for everyone else." Thomas smiled. "For years, I built bridges for other people. Maybe now it's time to build one for myself." They toasted to new beginnings, the waves crashing rhythmically below. On a warm summer night, Thomas stood once more on his balcony, wineglass in hand. The ocean stretched endlessly, steady and patient. He looked at Emily's picture on the table beside him. "I learned, sweetheart. Kindness isn't weakness. Boundaries aren't cruelty. And love doesn't mean surrendering myself." The villa glowed in the twilight, silent, peaceful, truly his. Robert would make his restitution payments, Jessica would fade into quiet, and Thomas would live, not as someone's victim, but as a man who had reclaimed his dignity. The waves rolled on, washing away footprints from the sand, leaving it clean for tomorrow. Thomas smiled. For the first time in decades, the future felt open, wide as the horizon before him. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for tuning in.